Hey everybody, this is Captain Resurrector. Before we get into the review, I just want you to be aware this video contains full game spoilers for Ultima I, The First Age of Darkness. I recommend that if you haven't played this game before, you go ahead and play it before watching the video. You can get the DOS version and a pack of the first 3 Ultimas on GOG for like $5, or if you prefer to play on Apple II or C64 or something like that, I'm sure you could find any of those versions without too much hassle and they'd serve you well. If you have played Ultima, or you don't mind getting spoiled, we'll get right down to it. It is the year 5 BDQ. Ultima has just released for the Apple II computer. It is the first game created for commercial release by the young programmer and fantasy enthusiast Richard Garriott, after one of his hobbyist projects, A Calibeth World of Doom, had been unexpectedly noticed and published by California Pacific Computer Company 2 years prior. A Calibeth had been one of the first attempts to translate the gameplay of pen and paper RPGs, such as Dungeons & Dragons, into a functioning video game. It consisted mostly of running around in randomly generated dungeons killing monsters. Ultima was essentially a massively expanded overhaul of A Calibeth, with a larger world, better graphics, more variety in quests, and a proper endgame. 5 years later, a remake was released for several computer platforms, now under the title Ultima I, The First Age of Darkness. The name change makes sense, after all they were up to Ultima 4 by then. This remake made several substantial improvements besides just nicer graphics. It changed the overworld battles so that monsters roam around instead of just popping up next to you as in the original, it greatly sped up dungeon navigation, and it also included nice maps of the 4 continents, bringing it in line with the sequels which typically come with a map. For this review, I played this remake in its DOS release. I had already played it years ago after a friend's dad gave me his old computer with a bunch of old games on it, including the Ultima collection. This is the only Ultima game I ever played to completion, and I consider the whole series to be serious unfinished business. One thing you need to understand going into a game this old is that the manual is really part of the game. There was only so much storage available on those floppy disks, so much of the story, world building, and general basic information is relegated to the manual. Interestingly, this game had a little card with it that gives you most of the information you need to actually play the game, but the manual itself is here to set the vibes, which is very important. The land of Sosaria is under siege by all manner of monsters and turncoats, all under the sway of the evil wizard Mondain. Protected by his gem of immortality, Mondain is watching and waiting, as monsters destroy towns and harass travelers, holing up in deep-delved ruins of long-lost civilizations, and the 8 kings of the realm scheme against each other, each waiting for the chance to strike and take over. The narration singles out Lord British, Garriott's self-insert character actually, as the most wise and benevolent of these kings, with dreams of building a peaceful and united Sosaria. This sounds a little fishy to me. All the other kings are trying to bring about the downfall of their rivals, while British wants to unite the realm, but isn't that basically the same thing? It sounds like old-school medieval propaganda, like if the king you serve conquers everything, he's ushering in an age of peace and unity. I've picked up a vague idea of what happens in the sequels, mostly from half-remembered Spoonie videos I watched forever ago. But if I'm on the money and Lord British gets up to some shenanigans in later games, please nobody spoil it for me. In the back of the manual, you get a list of spells and a nice illustrated bestiary of totally not copyright-infringing monsters, like Balrons, and Trents, and Mind Whippers, which flay people's minds. Are you even trying not to get sued? No dragons, oddly, despite both the box art and the cover of the manual featuring a badass dragon. At least there are cute little dragon turtles you can find in the water. I always like them. The section on character creation is of particular interest. You get to choose from 4 races, namely human, elf, dwarf, and... Bobbit, come on now. Each of these is given nice poetic descriptions that correspond with the stat boosts they start out with. For instance, Bobbits have low strength and high wisdom. Then you also get 4 classes: Fighter, Cleric, Wizard, and Thief. Fighters can use all weapons, Wizards get all spells, Clerics get only some spells but their spells never miss, and Thieves are better at disarming traps. This description sounds like a nice balanced choice of character types, though the Thief would necessarily be pretty underpowered in a game where thieving plays such a small role. The problem here is that the manual lies. There are no equipment restrictions, so any class can use any weapon or armor like the fighter is supposed to, Everyone can use cleric spells, so clerics aren't special either. Thieves don't have anything inherent about them that makes them better at disarming traps, they just start off with high agility, and the traps take your agility stat into account. Fighters get high agility too, actually, making thieves especially pointless. In fact, the only difference any class gets besides boosts to starting stats is that the wizard really does get a few extra spells, which are nice, but nothing earth-shattering. So really, character creation doesn't actually matter, just pick a good name and get playing. Now, right off the bat, you'll notice the single most important thing about Ultima, the exploration interface. For all the million quirks and game design dead ends that this game has, and believe me, we'll get to them, I cannot possibly overemphasize how unbelievably good the exploration interface is. You walk around outside using the arrow keys on a grid of tiles representing grassland, woods, water, and so on, with monsters occasionally harassing you and your food supplies slowly dwindling. All of these terrain types interact with you differently based on your method of transportation. For instance, you can't walk on water, and you can't fly through the woods in an air car. Here and there you find a town or castle icon, and by standing on top of it and pushing E for enter, you can walk around inside the town or castle, interacting with shopkeepers and kings, getting in fights with guards, and committing cold-blooded murder. Alternatively, you can walk to a cave icon to enter a first-person dungeon crawling view, exploring wireframe dungeons being pursued by wireframe monsters. This basic overworld town dungeon framework, with very little alteration or improvement besides better graphics, is the backbone of the exploration systems of just about every RPG I've played, from Dragon Quest to Final Fantasy, The Legend of Zelda if you count it, and especially the original Phantasy Star, which unlike those others had first-person dungeons as well. Because this system is used freaking everywhere, it's easy to overlook how elegant it is and how ingenious it was at this early date. This system allows for a game world that changes in scale, zooming in for detailed interactions like going to the grocery store, and zooming out for broader interactions like sailing across the sea to another continent. This allows the smaller towns and castles to be moved around in and interacted with without the need of making the outdoors big enough to fit the towns to scale, which would have made the game far too large. The transition in scales is made intuitive by the visual of the single-tile town becoming a whole screen upon entering, which keeps the player grounded. I know this all sounds extremely basic in hindsight, but it works. It works so well it couldn't help but become cliché. For historical context, the few other RPGs I know of from the same time or earlier, like Rogue, Temple of Apshai, or Wizardry, all take place in one confined underground space, sometimes with an above ground rendered entirely in menus. This lends these game worlds a limited scope, which isn't necessarily a problem. All of those games were purposely designed to be claustrophobic dungeon crawls. However, Richard Garriott was going for a more expansive adventure. His previous game Akalabeth, which Ultima is largely based on, had a sort of embryonic form of this interface, with a much simpler overworld populated with first-person dungeons, shops, and one castle. Now, in practice, Akalabeth is not really more expansive than those dungeon games, since the overworld is empty but for entrances to dungeons and buildings, and the shopkeepers and Lord British are rendered as mere walls of text. When Garriott returned to the Akalabeth concept for Ultima, he made a larger overworld with multiple continents to explore, enemies to fight, and quest objectives to find, and perhaps more importantly, made the towns and castles actually traversable. Rather than navigate a text menu to buy a sword, as in Akalabeth or Wizardry, you physically walk up to a little guy behind a counter, press T for transact, and buy the sword from him. Ultima is, to my knowledge, the first game to let you walk around in a large, multi-section open world that is represented purely graphically. That, above all else, is Ultima's legacy. So, I've gone on and on about the manual and the interface, but what about the game part? What exactly do you do in Ultima? Well, a lot of what you do is figure out what the hell you're supposed to do. You are given basically no direction, you just spawn in and start exploring. That much is pretty standard, but you'll notice if you read the manual, it never tells you how to, level up? Raise your stats? Extremely basic gameplay goals like that? If you bring up your stats, you'll see that you're level 1, and whenever you kill an enemy, you get experience and gold. If you're like me, and this game came out before you were born, and you were raised on normal games, you'll probably say, of course, I'm supposed to run around fighting monsters, and when I level up my stats will increase. Well, no, that's not how this works. This isn't a normal game because normal games weren't invented yet. We'll get to it, but suffice to say for now that figuring out how to make your character stronger is part of the intended challenge of the game. If you know what to do, it's really straightforward, but you're not supposed to know what to do going in. You get two sources of information in this game. First, you can offer the kings of the land your service, and each of the 8 kings will give you a quest. 4 of these quests, the ones involving killing a certain monster, are necessary to beat the game, though you really want to do the other 4 as well. Come to think of it, these might be the first side quests in video game history. Whenever you complete a quest, the king will often give you a hint on how to trigger the endgame. Second, you can buy drinks at the tavern. This is a crapshoot, but pretty necessary if you're going to beat the game without guides. When you buy a drink, you may or may not get a random hint from the bartender, and there's no way to know if you've seen all of them, since you can get repeats. Also, your character can only take so much alcohol, I think influenced by their stamina stat, and if you get blackout drunk, somebody in the pub will seduce you and take half your money. If you're dumb like me and keep buying drinks, you'll get seduced over and over until you leave the town and come back. I got a few tavern hints for footage purposes, but I already know how to beat the game, so I mostly ignored them in this playthrough. This early in the game, your only goal is to survive. You have very little health, very little gold, and if you don't take care of those problems quick, you'll starve or get clobbered to death by orcs. So what you want to do is immediately get your hands on a horse and as good of a weapon as you can afford. This way your food and health will lower at a slower rate. See, the idea is you move around faster on a horse so your food lasts longer. Then you go park yourself next to a dungeon near a town and castle and start grinding for money and health. Yeah, this is where we start getting into that whole normal games weren't invented yet thing. Unlike later RPGs, you don't start the game with a low max HP that you increase over time. You actually start with a really high cap and really low HP. To raise your health, you have 2 options. 1, you can pay the kings to heal you, or 2, you kill monsters in the dungeons. It's really weird, but that's what you do. If you fight overworld monsters, all they give you is experience and gold, but whenever you leave a dungeon, you get a boost to your HP proportional to how many monsters you killed while you were in there. Health is less a fixed statistic, and more a resource to be hoarded like money and items, and grinding up high levels of HP before attempting a difficult section is a core piece of Ultima's gameplay loop. So you run around the top floor of a dungeon, popping out every once in a while to get your health boost and reseed the chests and coffins that the game randomly generates when you enter, and you build up health and money, occasionally running to town to top off your food supply. As this process goes on, more things will become available in the shops. I don't know how exactly this works, but before too long you will have decent equipment and an air car, at which point you can actually start beating the game. As soon as you have the air car, you want to zoom around all 4 continents, getting quests from all the kings. Some of the kings ask you to go on pilgrimages to certain monuments on the overworld. These monuments give you stat bonuses and weapons, though this one, the Eastern Signpost, does nothing. If you see one a king was looking for and then go talk to him, he will raise your strength stat. Now, it took me a while to realize this my first time around, but these pilgrimages are entirely repeatable. You can't use a monument twice in a row, but if you just fly away to a different one and then come back, you get the stat boost again. So what you want to do, as cheesy as this sounds, is just zip back and forth between 2 monuments until both of their stats are maxed out, then move on to another pair of monuments. I just want to emphasize, this isn't an exploit or an oversight. This bit of weirdness is the only way to raise your stats, and is a fully intended step to winning. This sort of thing is what I mean when I say this game is straightforward when you know what to do, but figuring out what to do is a big part of the challenge. The health boosts from dungeons and the stat-raising monuments are both things you just have to figure out as you play. Once you have your stats jacked up as high as you can get them, it's time to go dungeon crawling, which is easily the best part of the game. There's something oddly atmospheric about these pitch-black wireframe hallways. It's somehow abstract and immersive at the same time. The point of the dungeons ultimately is that they contain all of the quest-relevant monsters. Every dungeon has the same monsters at the same levels, so I find the simplest and most enjoyable way to do the monster quests is to pick a dungeon and explore it, mapping just enough to find a down ladder, getting deeper every time until the monsters are too strong for you. At that point, you grind for health down in the depths until you're ready to go deeper. The enemies get real strong real quick, and they can easily gang up on you from multiple sides. Particularly dangerous are the gremlins, which don't hurt you, but whenever they land a hit, they steal half your food. It doesn't matter how overpowered you get, a gremlin can always kill you in a few turns if you're unlucky. To beat the game, you need to bring 4 of the king's different monsters, the hardest being King Shamino's quest for a Balron. This time around, my dungeon had a level 9 with no down ladder. Now, I know the dungeons have 10 levels in this game, but also they're procedurally generated, meaning sometimes the down ladder ends up out of bounds. So, thinking Balrons only show up on the bottom floor, I ran back to town and bought a bunch of ladder down spells. This highlights the character creation problem, actually. The one thing the wizard has that the others don't, the one thing that actually differentiates any class from the others in the long run, is that wizards have a few extra spells, the most theoretically useful one being Destroy, which gets rid of these red laser walls. If you decide you're not above cheesing the lower levels with ladder spells, however, Destroy is pretty much pointless. And to be clear, yes, the ladder spells, the most broken spells in the game, are usable by anybody. Effectively, none of your choices in character creation have any effect after the first hour or so of gameplay. You get the illusion of customization, but that illusion slowly evaporates as the game progresses. And while I'm being negative, remember how I said every dungeon has the same monsters? They don't have anything else in them either, besides randomly generated boxes of money. All those bajillion dungeons on the overworld are functionally equivalent. So are the towns with their mostly identical shops and their fully identical taverns with the same randomized hints. And when you think about it, the castles aren't that different either, they just each hand you a different quest. You can trigger the endgame from any of them. Now, the game does its best to obfuscate this redundancy by giving every dungeon, every town, even every shop a unique name, which is insanely good world building for such an old game. Even the 4 continents are given evocative names like Lands of the Dark Unknown or Lands of the Feudal Lords. But still, so much of the game is repeated material. A cynic could say, with some justification, that the core progression of Ultima could be recreated with 2 little islands. One has a town, a castle, and a dungeon, and the other has a shrine that maxes out your stats. Grind, get an air car, max your stats, go in the dungeon. All the rest is window dressing, the mere illusion of freedom. That cynic would be missing the point, however. What I just described is the experience on a second playthrough. On a first playthrough, Ultima is, above all else, a tangled web of arcane and obtuse systems that needs to be unraveled. Key mechanics need to be figured out either by experimenting or by getting lucky at the tavern. Redundant though much of the game's content is, the game needs to be sprawling, large enough to get lost in, so that the solutions aren't immediately obvious. I remember the first time through, checking out every town, peeking in multiple dungeons, and allowing the flavor text to spark my imagination. This is a game designed to be screwed around in until the path forward becomes clear. The writing, as well as the exploration interface I spent so long gushing about before, give Ultima a breadth, a verisimilitude, and a sense of place that no other game had attempted at the time. It's just much easier nowadays, after many similar games have been released, with unique things to find and do in each of their locations, to look at this early attempt at such a game world and see the cracks. When you talk to the kings after killing the requested monster, they each give you one of 4 colored gems needed to confront Mondain and give you a hint, the exception being Shamino, who instead tells you to take 9, but only 9, items from his storeroom. A quick little note on the controls in this game, and I promise it's on topic. Every action in the game, besides walking around with the arrow keys, is performed by tapping the key of the first letter in the action. So you hit A to attack, C to cast a spell, T to transact with an NPC, etc. This is intuitive, and the game comes with a list of all the commands. There are a few quirks, however. For instance, you climb ladders with K because C is taken, or you see your stats with Z because S steals. Also, there seems to have been a desire to use as much of the keyboard as possible, resulting in separate keys for basically identical actions, like the way you open coffins but you unlock chests. This makes it very possible to screw up when you're trying to do something non-routine or when you haven't played in a while. Alright, how do I enter? No. How do I mount the horse?
Oh my.
I don't remember.
Whoa. Talking about mounting horses, goddamn.
But, like, I don't remember what letter is get on the fucking horse.
Maybe you need to read the enclosed instruction booklet.
I do.
Yeah.
I do. Luckily, this is just test footage. If I was actually playing... Do I climb horse? No.
Huh?
There is no J, apparently.
Huh?
Get? I don't get horse.
Huh?
I don't open horse. What the fuck do I do with the horse? Inform and search, I'm in the woods. I know. I was trying to save food by getting a horse, but I'm starving to death because I can't remember how to get on it.
You know who else has dementia? You know who else has dementia? Hyperjump. Fire what?
Drop? Steal.
Drop balls? No effect view.
B! B!
Yeah.
B is Mount Horse?
Yeah. Honestly, sounds like a skill issue to me.
Yeah.
Because you...
Okay, I need to go buy food now.
Yeah, because you had a skill issue. Exactly, that's what I'm saying.
A redundancy like that bit me in the butt during this sequence because I went over to the storeroom and hit S, thinking that the guards would allow me to steal 9 items, then get mad at me for trying a 10th. Turns out, no, you're supposed to use G for get, which to my knowledge is completely unused at any point before this. You'd think that the guards wouldn't care either way. I guess if I steal, I look suspicious. Anyway, I had to fight my way out, and while I was at it, I decided to save the princess and kill Shimino just for funsies, and also because princesses give you some health and money if you save them. But I got into a rhythm and ended up killing the princess too. Long story short, I turned the game off, came back after having killed a second Balron, and got a few extra items that definitely weren't worth the hassle. Now we get to the end game, which is where the plot gets pretty nonsensical. Like I said, you can rescue princesses from the castles for money and health, but they will also give you a time machine if you're a space ace. To become a space ace, you have to buy a space shuttle from your local horse and buggy salesman. Which sounds absurd, but when you think about it, they were already building ships and air cars, so I'm just rolling with it. Make sure you're wearing a spacesuit from your local blacksmiths, or else you'll die when taking off. Then you play this cool little first-person space shooting segment, which kinda reminds me of Star Voyager on Atari 2600. It's a pretty fun little diversion. Kill a bunch of totally not Star Wars aliens, which are apparently in cahoots with Mondane somehow. Like I said, rolling with it. Thou hast achieved the rank of Space Ace! Now you go to a castle. Any castle, because all of them have a princess in their dungeons. This has always been the most confounding part of all of this to me. It's convenient for gameplay reasons, of course, but why do all of these kings have a princess locked up? Are they the daughters of the other lords and it's all part of their power struggle? Is it their own daughters and they're like grounded or something? And why do the princesses care whether I can fly a spaceship? So much of this game is just a nerd throwing as many cool things into his game as he can, and the result makes no sense. So you kill all of Lord British's guards, save the princess, walk right back inside to buy some health, naturally, and hop in the time machine. The final battle has a good deal of pomp and circumstance around it, with the biggest wall of text in the game describing your journey back in time to fight Mondane, kind of like Earthbound actually, and this ancient battleground with the gem of immortality glittering maliciously, and little magic explosions going off all around you. Once you smash the gem and chase Mondane around in his bat form for about a year, the world is saved. You know, for now. Thy selfless heroism hath saved our people, my worthy one. Should our gratitude alone not be enough to sustain thee, know that I, Lord British, hereby ordain that the entire realm of Sosaria be at thy service for all time henceforth. So let it be done. I love how Lord British is already talking as if he's in charge of Sosaria. I'm on to you. In conclusion, Ultima is weird. It's bizarre. It's messy. It's frankly not nearly as fun on a replay. However, it represents not an end in itself, but a new beginning. Ironically enough, given it's called Ultima and all. It's the first really impressive attempt at this style of RPG that I know of, the globe-spanning heroic quest, with many things to do and places to see, and a big, satisfying showdown for the fate of the world at the end. Many other game developers in the following years would take the Ultima concept and run with it, with better stories, more cohesive and detailed worlds, and more fleshed-out gameplay. And from what I've heard, one of the best to ever do it was Garriott himself. Captain Resurrector, and this is only the beginning for me too. Thank you for joining me on this little excursion into gaming's olden days, and I hope you'll come along for the next one.